I'm going to talk about the payroll assignment. And I opened the payroll file. This was in the Excel Chapter 2 folder. So that's where you'll find that from the files you downloaded in week 2. And I'm going to talk about how we would work on this. At the bottom, I wanted to point out that in notes, it shows you the calculations you would need for each of those. So that's a place to look. This area that's down in row 20 and beyond is what we're going to call our assumption area. These are things that we are going to be using to do the calculations for every row in our payroll table. So what that tells us is anything we use from here will probably need to be absolute or fixed, because I'm going to want to use the same cell from this area for the calculations in every row here. One of the things that you're going to do first is calculate regular pay and overtime pay. How you calculate each of those depends on whether they worked overtime or not. So we're going to have to do if statements for those to determine if they worked overtime first, and then we can calculate that based on that. So that's going to be the if function. So I'm going to start with regular pay, and different ways that we can put that if function in. I can go to formulas. It's a logical formula, so I can find if there. I could have searched for it in insert function, anything like that. But we talked about this last week. We have to do a test to determine how we're going to calculate it. Our test needs to determine whether they worked overtime or not. So I'm going to take their hours worked, and if it's greater than the base hours here, I know they worked overtime. And I'm going to make this fixed, so I can either type the dollar signs in or hit my F4 function key to make that fixed. So that will put the dollar signs in, and now I'm comparing. If the hours worked is greater than the base work hours, for this person it's true. So I'm going to come here and value of true. So how do I calculate their regular pay if they worked overtime? Well, they only get paid regular pay on the hours that are the base hours. So I'm going to be taking the base work hours, and again, I'm going to hit my F4 function key to make that fixed, and then multiply that times their hourly wage. And that will tell me how much they made on the first 40 hours that they worked. So this person would have made $3.98. Now, if they did not work overtime, even though this person was true, I want to be able to copy this. So I need to know how do I want to calculate this if they didn't work overtime? If they didn't work overtime, it's simply the hours worked times their hourly wage. So for this person, you can see it gives us the results. They're going to get $398. Click OK, copy that. And don't worry about the 0 at the bottom. You're going to be totaling this later on. It just copies it clear to the bottom, so it did not know that that wasn't there. You can delete it if you want. So that gives me the calculations for regular pay. Overtime pay is going to be very, very similar. I'm going to start with my if function. So that'll be on my recently used if I do the insert function. And again, same test. Is the hours worked greater than the base work hours? And again, make that fixed. And now, if, oops, I keep putting the wrong one in. Keep hitting that wrong button there. So if it's true, I need to calculate first how many overtime hours they worked. Now remember the algebraic rules of precedence. It will multiply and divide before it adds and subtracts. So I'm going to put this in parentheses because I want it to do this subtraction first before it tries to multiply it times their pay rate. So I'm going to take the hours worked minus the base rate, and again, anything in that area, I'm going to put those dollar signs in it to make it fixed. And then I am going to close those parentheses, so it'll subtract first and then multiply it times the hourly wage times the overtime rate, which we have down here, which is at now set at 1.5. And again, because it's from that area, I'm going to hit that F4 key and put those dollar signs in it to make it absolute. Now, if they didn't work overtime, this is really simple. We're just going to put a 0 in there so that they will get 0 overtime. So copy that. And you can see that anybody that worked less than 40 hours or less didn't get overtime. Okay, gross pay, I'm not going to show you. That's just regular pay and overtime pay added together. Taxable pay is going to be a little bit different. In taxable pay, we need to take out the number of dependents times the deductions per dependent so we can figure out how much federal tax they're going to be paying. So taxable pay is actually going to be just a formula that's going to be pretty simple. But what I wanted to do is, instead of using the absolute dollar signs in the formula, show you a different way to make a cell absolute. I'm going to come down here to deductions for dependents, and I'm going to click here and just type DEP for dependent and DED for deduction. So I just named it, hit enter, and I named that cell. Now when I use that in a formula, so my taxable pay is just going to be the gross pay minus the number of dependents times the deduction for a dependent, which is down here. When I click on this cell, notice it puts in my name, which is good, and that gives me my taxable pay $100 less than gross pay because they have 2 dependents worth $50 each. When I copy that, notice that that dependent deduction always stays fixed. I don't have to worry about the dollar sign. So that's just another way to make them fixed. Okay, the last formula I really want to go over is the withholding tax. In the withholding tax, we need to take that taxable pay and we need to look it up in this table to see what range they fall in so we know what their tax rate is. Sorry, that's going to be that vertical lookup formula. So if I go to my lookup and references, it's that VLOOKUP formula that allows us to find a value in one column and pull out a value in another column that's related to it. So I'm going to choose VLOOKUP. Now, before I did this, one of the things I would do, let me get out of that. I would name this range. It's just easier. But when I selected to name it, notice I did not select the titles. I don't want the titles in that range, just the values. Notice that this is in ascending order. It needs to be in order to work. So that's just one. They typed it in, but one of the things you need to know. I'm going to call this tax table. Hit enter, and then go back to my VLOOKUP function here. So VLOOKUP. And first of all, what I want to look up. Well, I'm going to look at the taxable pay and look up where it falls in this range. So this person falls between that 300 and 450. So we're going to charge them 25%. But that's the value I want to look up, and that's what they're asking for here. Table array. That's the array I just named right down here that has the wage that they can make up to this wage to be charged this percentage of tax. So I'm going to put that in, and note it'll be fixed because it's a named range. Now the column number, I tell you never put numbers in formulas. This is a case where you would, because this is column 1, this is column 2. I want to look this up in column 1, but I want to pull the value from column 2. So I'm going to put a 2 in here, and that will pull that value from column 2. So it's telling me I'm getting that 25% tax rate right here. So I'm going to finish this formula. I'm going to click OK, but that's not really what I want in this cell. This gives me the rate I'm going to charge. I'm going to edit this. I just double clicked on this. I could have also just clicked up here to edit it. It really doesn't matter which one I use. But what I want to do is I want to now multiply that. So I'm going to go clear to the end of that formula, outside the parentheses, and multiply that times the taxable pay. and that will give me what I am taking out in taxes. Okay, finally, I'm not going to do too much with these. FICA is charged on the gross pay, not the taxable pay, using this FICA rate. So it's just really a multiplication formula where you're multiplying the FICA rate times the gross pay. Again, not the taxable pay. Net pay, you're going to take the gross pay, subtract the withholding tax and the FICA tax. Don't subtract the taxable pay, just the withholding tax and the FICA tax are subtracted from the gross pay. This is what you get in your paycheck. You will use the sum function to total up the regular pay, the pay, all those things you just calculated. And then down here, you're going to use some of those other statistical functions to determine the average of the hours, the gross pay and the net pay, the highest and lowest. If you remember on our home, if we go back to our home, on the auto sum, those are right there if you click the arrow. So you have an average function, a max function, a min function. Those are what you're going to use for those. They work pretty much like the sum function. You have a range, but you'll use that. Again, you do not have to do this bin array. This is kind of beyond the scope of this course, so I'm not going to require you to do that bin array. When you're done, if you want to check what you've done, if you go back to Canvas, go to the week 13 module, there is a PDF file of the payroll sample that has this worksheet completed. So you can check all the values, the way things are supposed to look, so you can see if you did this correctly and kind of check yourself before you turn it in. So have fun with this assignment, and I will be back with you next week. Oh, you also submit this. There's a link in Canvas separate from the link for submitting your files that you do out of the book for chapter 3. There's a link to submit this in Canvas.